Hello again, good evening, and welcome back to another episode of Minds on Guard, where we're learning how to guard our minds against all of the manipulations, overt attacks, and attempts at thought and behavior control that we come under today here in the 21st century. I've been absent for a couple of weeks, so I'm very glad to see everybody back and joining us in this discussion tonight. In this video, I'm going to continue where we have left off in previous videos regarding the process of subversion as it was articulated by Mr. Yuri Bezmenov, a former KGB agent who defected to the United States and shared his knowledge of the political, social, and cultural subversion within Western audiences as a warning against what he thought was headed our way. If you've not yet seen the videos on the subject of subversion and psyops, I will link a few throughout this video so that you can catch up. To recap, we have discussed the first two stages of the process of subversion, which are demoralization and then destabilization. In the model that Bezmenov described, these first two stages take the most amount of time, where the last two are relatively quick by comparison. In this video, we will be discussing the third stage, which is called crisis. Now, I think that given the times we live in, it's very important to consider the various ways in which the crisis stage can manifest, particularly in ways that lead to a fundamental shift in how large groups of people perceive and understand reality, which in turn affect the behaviors and general status quo consensus of any society or group. When we consider the kinds of power and influence that are being wielded by media and other private interests, along with the interconnected investment and support of those powerful interests by government agencies through lobbying, what we face today is something of a crisis creation and manipulation machine, which churns out new and evolving catastrophes with the regularity of the rising and the setting of the sun. Imagine if we could power our cities on the energy that's put into fear campaigns, war propaganda, climate activism, and the general othering of those who fall into the social categories which stand for truth and against the powerful. Our energy crisis would be solved, hunger would soon be a non-issue, and every single person would have a roof over their head with fresh air conditioning and the cleanest water imaginable. Of course, I'm being facetious here, but my point is that we are so inundated with this constant state of crisis that there is no area of human life which doesn't have the fingerprint of some kind of outside controlling influence somewhere in the mix. Now, this is not meant to incite more fear, but rather to point people toward the truth of the state of things. As I've said many times on this channel, reality is as it is. If we wish to have integrity, we have to set aside our desires for how we wish things were and instead deal with them as they are. This starts by recognizing the truth of the matter. From there, we can move forward and keep our minds as clear as possible, hopefully able to be wise to forces which seek to control our thoughts and our behavior. The problem is, once the first two stages of the process of subversion have been completed, it becomes very difficult to fight against the damage that has been done to the fabric of a society. As we have discussed in previous videos, the process of subversion is carried out through four stages. During the first stage, demoralization, the major objective of the entity doing the subverting is to attack the centers of society which act as pillars of truth. Religion, education, social life, power relationships, labor and economic relationships, and law and order are all targets for these attacks. These areas are where people in societies anchor their attachment to the ways and means of well-ordered, properly functioning society where human life is valued for the intrinsic worth that has been bestowed by God through His act of creation. Once these areas have been sufficiently weakened over time, a further step of destabilization occurs, where the threads which hold a society together begin to unravel. This is made possible due to the fact that through systematic demoralization, a deep psychological fracturing has taken place, where the once stable foundations of society that had been built up through adherence as closely as possible to objective truth as ordained by God regarding relationships of all kinds have been rendered nearly meaningless. Think of a suspension bridge where every method of structural support is, one by one, severed or compromised to the point of failure, until only a single beam is left to hold the weight of the entire span of the bridge. All it takes at that point is a single blow to the last piece of support, and the whole structure comes crashing down into the water. That is the scenario which faces a society that has been taken through the first two stages of the process of subversion and is left at the crisis stage. Where the first two have taken decades, the crisis can happen in a matter of months at the largest scales, and in really just a few days if we focus in on the micro versions of this process. In my opinion, what we see today is actually a continual instigation, proliferation, and then exploitation of many crises, which is leading to a situation where, inevitably, a global-scale catastrophe will take place. If you think what happened with the pandemic in 2020 was the big one, I suggest that it was only the beginning. We've heard just as much from the groups who hold power and influence over the ways that our world has been moving. Concepts like the Great Reset, UN Agenda 2030, and biodigital convergence could not take place without the initial crisis at the kind of scale which brought people all over the world into forced compliance with overt behavior and thought control. What I wish to stress here is that it's really not so much about the specific event or details of certain actions which meet the kinds of conditions of a crisis that would further the process of subversion, but rather it's who is waiting in the wings to capitalize on the fallout from any event or series of events such that they are able to exert dominating control over people's lives, behavior, and minds. The last 2 decades have seen horrendous natural disasters, economic crashes, global pandemics, various outbreaks of wars, and in every instance we see that there are always opportunistic people and groups who are ready to seize upon the vacuum that's left by the destruction and tighten the grip of power and influence over ordinary people's lives. The saying that gets used often in this situation is that those in power never let a good crisis go to waste. And when it comes to the process of subversion, we need to pay attention to the groups who step out with various forms of rhetoric surrounding rebuilding efforts, those who traffic in generalized ideological narratives, and most of all, the various philanthropic and non-governmental organizations who always seem to be ready and waiting to provide money, aid, and the appointment of experts to lead us through times of hardship and social unrest. What is truly heartbreaking is that whenever crises do happen, they are usually very real, and human lives are deeply and irreversibly affected. There is great danger which goes far beyond the initial catalyzing events which led to the crisis. The tragedy of loss is the most fertile ground for planting the seeds of dialectics, where solutions to problems come straight from the very people who spun the narratives which led to the problems in the first place. We have discussed this before, and it's a control tactic that has been used time and time again for many, many years. As we've been learning, what makes the problem reaction solution methods so effective is that they always take advantage of the results of the first two stages of the process of subversion, where people are so far removed from what once established and maintained a sense of the truth that they cannot recognize the wolf that is hiding among them with the brilliant solutions to various problems in the world. We saw this play out to the most horrendous of degrees during 2020 and 2021, with all of the various spins, twists, and turns surrounding the narrative of the coronavirus outbreak. I won't go into the details here. There's plenty of videos on YouTube and other sources that do. But I will simply state that we as a people must never again give up our freedom to think, act, and question what we see playing out in front of us. That event kicked off a deeper front in a war that had been building for decades. The resulting psychological attack by those who we trusted to be our leaders, having our best collective interests at the front of all decisions, is one that must be seen for what it truly was. Those who have been self-ordained by the institutions of man into positions of power moved en masse to subvert, dominate, steal, and control the minds, bodies, livelihoods, and freedom of everyone who is not part of their exclusive club. Unfortunately, the work that had been done in the early part of the 20th century regarding the attacking of critical thinking skills of every society in the modern world has gone extremely far, and we are in a dire state. Our abdication, at least collectively, of responsibility to think and live with sober minds and hearts has yielded a world where all of the worst aspects of humans, their narcissism, fear, laziness, and a general refusal of the truth, is now the norm. I'm afraid that the next major crisis that we see will see the true death of freedom in this world. I pray that that's not the case, and that people will rise up to stand for truth and our collective right to live as free and sovereign individuals with our own minds. Those at the largest of the global organizations would love nothing more than to make sure that we stay asleep to their power grabs. In the end, God is sovereign over all and has the final victory already well in hand, and we should rejoice at that. But until then, we need to work to see through the political rhetoric, the social narratives, and the psychological control tactics which keep us focused on hating our brothers and sisters rather than the schemes of the devil. He is attacking our minds and hearts every day at all hours of every day. In our next video, we'll pick up with the fourth stage of the process, normalization. But until then, stay safe, stay diligent, and stay vigilant, keeping your minds on guard.